Newsreels and pictures from the 1940s are not always labeled, and some must be identified. Most of the time that work falls to historians, but you don't always have one on hand. You may have to identify it yourself. Today I will show you how to break apart World War II footage and determine the approximate date and what is going on. The first bit of footage I'd like to use would be a newsreel taken from, well, you'll determine the date very soon. Based on the footage seen here in the first scene before we started, you see these men are in dress uniforms. Based on these dress uniforms and the insignias on their helmets and shirts, these men are from the 82nd Airborne, most likely. Let's continue. The music you hear is probably added afterwards and was not played during it. These newsreels were recorded in silence so that they could add whatever sound they want. That'll come up later. Obviously, this is a parade, and the flag nations from the different allies are present, including Italy. I don't know if you saw it. It's not the front one was France. I do believe, but I think I saw Italy in there as well. So that puts it post 1943. We're streaming out. This is probably after Victory Day. This is actually most likely a victory parade from post 1945, maybe the early victories of 1946 when the 82nd Airborne returned to Europe. Returned to the United States from Europe. Actually go forward a little bit. Here we go. Those artillery pieces you saw previously were late war pieces, so this is most definitely after the war. See, there's United States, Great Britain, France, and let's see the Soviet Union. But previously they had another group of flags back here, I don't know if you noticed, that had the Italian flag. These are the early deuce and half trucks. See these artillery pieces? These are late war self-propelled artillery guns. This is probably afterwards. George E. Patton, that is actually a famous piece named after the General Patton who died. This is the flag of the 82nd Airborne, so this is definitely the 82nd Airborne. Oh, footage is changing. Yep, home from Europe. So that most definitely puts it late war, or after the war, probably after the war, most likely. So we'll move on to another. Most of that probably went over your head. So we're going to actually break down and show you how to determine what these pictures are. Okay, first off we're going to look at the terrain. This is very muddy, so this probably puts us in spring. This is a desolate forest, okay? So those two things together, the mud caused by the melting snows, probably puts us in western Germany, eastern France, probably right on the border. The fact that it's spring, based on the 1945 spring, that is most likely where we're at. Now we're going to delve further into the picture. This is Sherman, M4 Sherman. This is actually quite a different Sherman from the normal Sherman based on the gun. This is a 76mm high-velocity gun, which is quite different from the early Shermans. Also, the armor is quite a bit more sloped than the early Shermans. This is a late Sherman, which does put us in 44 or 45. Most likely 45. Now we're going to look at the uniforms. This is a standard tanker's uniform, standard helmet, so you can't really tell anything there. This is applique armor, which is armor that was added afterwards by the crew to increase the armor of the tank because the M4 Sherman was lightly armored compared to German tanks. So this most likely puts us 1945 in spring in Germany. Move on to another picture because once again that probably went over your head. We'll move on to an easier one. Alright, sorry about this picture being quite small. This is the best example I found of the next one. Now, we're going to do what we did the last one. We're going to look at the terrain. And this is obviously desert, so this probably puts us in the Desert Warfare 1941-1942. But then we looked at the tanks, as we did the last time. These are M4 Shermans, but you can tell by the gun, this is the British version of the M4 Sherman. Not quite the Firefly, but the early variants. So this is most likely 1942, after the British have received their shipments. it's a 1940s picture, so it's not the best quality. You can't really tell what the tanker's wearing, but it's most likely a standard British uniform. Based on the fact that you can see several more tanks in the background, this high concentration of tanks in the 1942 campaign, this is probably the Second Battle of El Alamein. That was quite an easy one to determine, based on the tanks and the terrain. So, 1942, Battle of El Alamein. In fact, the Second Battle of El Alamein. Let's move on. Let's do a more difficult one. Naval ships are usually harder to identify, especially naval battles, because to most people, ships look really similar. If I showed you the USS Missouri, and then I showed you a Fletcher-class destroyer, you probably wouldn't know the difference. But to the trained eye, it's a little bit easier. Now, this picture is a little bit warped because it was taken from a carrier plane, so it was warped as it was flying quite fast. But we can still identify the ship. Now, this is quite a long ship, and it's weirdly shaped. Based on this prow, and the keel, you can't really tell the keels unless you know how to read the waves. Looking at the waves and looking at the way the ship's turned, you can determine the keel. So the keel and the prow together probably marks this as a Japanese ship. Now, we're going to look at the guns. These are two massive gun turrets with massive guns. Now, based on the size of the ship, this is probably a battleship. Based on the prow, this is probably a super battleship, and the keel together. And to these massive guns, these are probably 18-inch guns, if I can guess. And that would place it as the famous Yamato super battleship. Now, I'm going to tell you, I actually knew this picture from past experience. This was easier than it was the first time when I identified this. But naval ships are hard to identify. This picture was actually taken in, I believe, late 44, early 45, when the Yamato was sunk by U.S. carrier planes. But without past knowledge, and what I showed you, if you know your history, and you know the prow and the keel, and you know the gun size, you could probably identify this ship. With all I've showed you today, hopefully you can at least have a semblance of hope of identifying World War II reels and footage from pictures. It is very important to know this, for if you are in history class, say AP World or AP US, and you need to identify and describe a picture, having this information will make that a lot easier. And it certainly made my AP experience a lot easier. So you won't always have a historian like myself on hand, and you will need to know this information for yourself if you have any semblance of a hope to pass this class.